This learning is Le'ili Nishmas Beruria Bas Chananya, Maseches Terumos Perek Mishnah. The Mishnah begins by teaching some examples of how a person is allowed to give truma from better produce for produce which is not as good, but not the other way around. V'termin zeisei shemen al zeisei kevesh. A person is allowed to separate truma from olives that have a lot of oil in them for olives that are used to be pickled because they don't have a lot of oil in them. V'lei zeisei kevesh al zeisei shemen. However, a person is not allowed to separate truma from olives that are set aside to be pickled for olives that have a lot of oil in them. The Mishnah continues, "V'yayin she'einei mevushal ala mevushal." A person is allowed to separate truma from wine that is not cooked for wine that is cooked, because wine that isn't cooked is better wine. V'loy min mevushal ala she'einei mevushal. But a person can't separate truma from wine that is cooked for wine that was not cooked. The Mishnah continues, so earlier we learned that a person is allowed to separate truma from a produce for any other produce that is of the same type as it. So for example, a person could separate truma from wheat for other wheat, even if they're different colors of wheat. So the Mishnah gives us the rule over here, which is Zaha Klal, this is the rule. Kol shu kilayim b'chaveri, any type of produce which is kilayim with another type of produce, so they're considered two different types, and therefore la yitrim mizal zeh, a person shouldn't separate truma from one of them for the other one. Afilu min hayofa ala ra, even if he's separating from the better one for the one that's not as good. V'chol she'einei kilayim b'chaveri, and any produce which is not considered to be kilayim with another produce, so they're considered to be the same type of kilayim, so they're also the same type by truma, and therefore terim min hayofa ala ra, a person is allowed to separate truma from one of them for the other one because they're the same type of produce. However, if they're a different quality, a person has to separate from the better one for the one that's not as good. Avolei min hara ala yofa, but not from the one that's not as good for the one that's better. The Mishnah continues that ve'im taram, that if a person did separate min hara ala yafa from the one that's not as good for the one that's better, so since they're the same type of produce, so therefore trumasi truma, the truma is a good truma. And there's one exception to this, which is chutz min hazunin ala chitim, except for zunin, which is a type of wheat, for other wheat. And the reason is she'inan, except for a certain type of wheat which is very inferior and is used to feed birds, which is called zunin, it's darnel. A person is not allowed to separate truma from darnel for regular wheat, and the reason is she'inan eichel, because it's not considered to be food for people, rather it's food for animals. And the Mishnah concludes by presenting a case where there's an argument, just like there is by kilayim, and that is v'hakishus v'hamalofafain, a regular cucumber and a kirby cucumber. So the Tanna Kama says min echad, they're considered one type of produce, and a person could separate for one for the other. And Rabbi Yehuda says that shnei minin, they're considered two types of produce, and a person can't separate from one type for the other.